Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Rachel Rear and Jonathan D. to discuss Catch the Sparrow, A Search for a Sister and the Truth of Her Murder, published by our friends at Bloomsbury Publishing. Rachel Rear is a New York City public school teacher and actor who holds an MA from Columbia University and an MFA from the New School. She has been published in the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and numerous other publications. To moderate tonight's conversation, we are also joined by Jonathan D., who is the author of 7 novels. He is also a National Magazine Award-nominated literary critic for Harper's and The New Yorker, a former contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, a former senior editor of the Paris Review, and the recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation. His most recent novel, The Locals, was named a Best Book of 2017 by, among others, The Washington Post, The Guardian, Vox, and the Seattle Times. He teaches in the creative writing program at Syracuse University as well. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. And please order your copy of Catch the Sparrow from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Hello.
Hi. I'm getting an echo on my. We have a
Same.
tech problem already. We're getting an echo here, but.
I hear an echo from you, Rachel. Do you want to maybe try disconnecting the headphones just in case? So sorry.
I heard.
Let's see.
What better?
Okay. So sorry, everyone. Just give us one moment to figure this all out. Okay. Let's see where to start. Do you have a phone nearby or any other electronic devices? Let's see.
Depends what you need my nearby, but no.
Well, you sound good, John.
Okay.
But
I'm wondering, is that any better? No.
it does sound better on my end.
I turned my volume down on my computer. There was a little echo when you were speaking too.
Okay. Well, on my end, it's gone.
Okay.
I hope it's gone for you, and let's just get this going. So sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, that's life on the virtual stage, right? Anyway, hi, Rachel. Very nice.
Hi.
I feel very lucky and happy to be doing this with you. I'm just gonna, if it's okay with you, set up the book a tiny bit more before we begin, if it's okay with you, with a brief reading from it. Catch the Sparrow is at its heart, it's a true crime book. It is the story of a young woman named Stephanie Kupczynski who disappeared around Rochester, New York, not far from where I am now, actually, in the early 90s. And is 27 years old, young, pretty music teacher, beloved by everyone. It's the kind of story that sadly, one is somewhat familiar with. So the book is about that case, the initial effort to solve it, the reopening of it, and the efforts to close it many years later. And if that's all this book were, that would be plenty, because it's an amazing story. Stephanie's a compelling character. There are a lot of compelling characters in the book, a lot of twists within the investigation itself. But what makes it a really special book is that it exists on another plane as well. Which goes something like this. Rachel herself was raised in New Jersey. Her parents divorced when she was an adolescent, and some years later, her mother remarried. And the man she remarried, Rachel's stepfather, was Jerry Kupczynski, the father of Stephanie, who at that point had been missing for several years, but technically the matter of her whereabouts was still unresolved. So it's a family story going on in the background of the story of Stephanie herself, and it makes for a book that's not like really anything I think I've ever read before. So Rachel, if it's okay with you, just to give folks a flavor of what we're talking about, maybe you'll read a bit from the book.
I'd love to. I'm going to read chapter 2, actually. It helps me if I turn the volume down. Can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, great.
Yes.
I'm going to read chapter 2, which kind of explains my connection to Stephanie a little bit. I was 20 when my mother married Jerry Kopczynski and thus married into his family's mystery. A photo of my new stepsister, Stephanie, who was then still missing, stood on the table with the wedding cake. It was the same photo as on the missing person posters that had hung all over Monroe County for years. Stephanie's face at an angle, her wavy hair and side-swept bangs frosted auburn, a blush across her cheeks, her lips shiny with coral-colored gloss. Her eyes, large and brown as a Van Morrison song, gazing not at the camera but at someone out of frame, to the side, as if she were listening to the setup of a joke she wasn't yet sure was funny. When Stephanie went missing from her apartment in Greece, New York, almost 7 years earlier, she was 27. I was 14. Her disappearance jolted the New Jersey town of East Brunswick, where we both grew up. Everyone knew the few facts about the case. A beloved violin teacher gone from the home she shared only with her pet birds, the sheets missing from her bed, her checkbook found discarded on the side of the road, her car abandoned in an airport parking lot. That was all anyone knew. A beautiful woman was gone. In the absence of any more facts, I spun stories in my mind, an illicit romance, an elopement, an escape to another life, an intruder, sweeping her off into the night, alien abduction, amnesia. Her father, Jerry, the head of our school system's music department, a stoic man with an impenetrable Ukrainian accent, drifted hazily through my band class that fall. He had suffered from Parkinson's disease for longer than I knew him. His accent, paired with his head bobbings and arm wavings, inspired what my middle school friends and I thought were hilarious impersonations. No suit cases, instrument cases, he meant, in the audience, he would say at concerts in the high school auditorium, standing 5'6" at the podium. After Stephanie vanished, it wasn't funny anymore. He was even more hunched, more somber. As a younger orchestra director, he'd been famous for pulling devious pranks and bellowing at out-of-tune or offbeat instrumentalists, but he'd softened and stopped making jokes by the time I started high school. Dipping my head and casting my eyes in his direction, I told my friend, "He looks broken." Sitting at dinner with my family in the weeks after Stephanie went missing, wiggling my feet in their black Converse All-Stars under the table, I would ask, how can someone be there one minute and not the next? My parents hushed me with stern looks. Don't scare your younger sisters. But I was transfixed. Nothing like this had ever happened to anyone I knew. And Jerry awed me, forging forward day after day, despite not knowing whether his daughter was still alive. My own father, a loud, aggressive, 6-foot-tall, tough guy, Brooklyn-born and bred, was nothing like Jerry. One morning when I was 14, just around the time of Stephanie's disappearance, my mother came to my bedroom in tears, holding a crumpled phone bill she'd dug from the trash. "Your father's having an affair," she told me. She asked me not to tell my younger sisters. Even then, I understood it was probably not his first. Later that day, as I sat in our backyard, my father came out to talk to me. "Your mother says she told you about your father's affair," he said. "Well, your father wants you to know he's very sorry." I said. Although he was a cruel man, abusive by any measure, it took me years to be able to use that word for my father's treatment of me. Yes, there were a few times I went to school with bruises on my arms where he'd punched me. He shook me violently when he was angry, and at least one of my friends called the Division of Youth and Family Services about him. Whenever I threatened to call myself, he'd say, "Go ahead, they'll just come take you away from your family." A neighbor of ours told me that one winter when I was 2 years old, walking with my dad on the sidewalk, I wanted to walk on the unshoveled icy snow instead of the pavement. "You'll fall if you walk there," he warned, but I wouldn't stop, so he shoved me to make me fall on the ice. "You'll learn to listen," he said. Another time when he walked me to the bus stop in first grade, I had to run home for my lunchbox. As I ran back to the bus stop, I could see him leaning over and gesturing vehemently to an audience of laughing kids. My heart sank. I knew even from a distance that he was mocking me. "Your dad said, 'You're so stupid you'd forget your head if it wasn't screwed on,'" the kids jeered. By the time I was in high school, he was reminding me daily how worthless I was, that I was useless, a lazy good for nothing, that I would never amount to anything, that no man would ever love me. It was constant, insidious. And there was his ever-present rage and yelling, his consistent hitting, punching, and kicking. Naturally feisty, I found it impossible not to fight back. When pushed, I bared my teeth and battled. Maybe that's why my mother and sisters did not. After my mother discovered my father's affair, his abuse of me intensified. I'd lost all respect for him after his pathetic attempt to apologize to me, and almost every dinner turned into a screaming match. My sisters, from whom I kept the secret, could not understand why I was always at odds with him. Why can't you just keep quiet, Laura would say, sitting with me at the top of the stairs while I cried. You just make things worse for yourself. When I left for college at 17, my father, lacking his usual target, focused all his cruelty on my younger sisters, but Laura was 16 by then and wouldn't take it. Go ahead, she once said to him, hit me, I'll kill you. Another time when he began shaking Vanessa, then 12, my mother threw a glass at him and it shattered against the wall. My mother finally found the courage to leave him when I was 19. We moved with her into a small blue split-level house in another part of town. Jerry Kopczynski, my old music teacher, was our next-door neighbor. His wife, Jean, Stephanie's mother, died the same fall after a long struggle with multiple sclerosis. It was 1996. By that time, it had been 5 years since Stephanie's disappearance. Little had happened, and the case had stalled. My mom befriended Jerry over the fence while they pruned tomatoes and pulled weeds together. Soon I received a quaint letter from Jerry in my college mailbox asking for permission to date my mother. I was stunned. My father had never cared what I thought about anything he did, and Jerry was almost 20 years older than my mother. I thought they were just neighborly companions, but there was more there, much more. To me, he seemed gentle. He loved our dog, Ben, and he expressed a desire to take care of my mother. Jerry felt like a better deal, like an upgrade from my father. He was gruff, but I trusted him. He was indomitable, but I thought I knew him, and I couldn't imagine him hurting anyone the way my father had hurt us. So I called Jerry from my dorm room to give my blessing. The two boys stumbled across Stephanie's bones 7 months after the wedding. The medical examiner kept Stephanie's remains for testing, so it was another 6 months before we could have her funeral. I sat in the back row at the church on Route 18. That was when I first set eyes on Tom Redmond, the man my mother said Stephanie was going to marry. He sat between his two sisters in a pew near the front. An enormous portrait of Stephanie, half laughing at the whole ordeal, watched over my other stepsister, Melanie, as she played the meditation from Thais on her violin. Stephanie's ashes rested in a tiny box up at the front of the church and were later buried at the foot of her mother's grave in Vincenttown, New Jersey. Jerry often said I looked like Stephanie, that when he stared into my eyes, he saw hers. It's true, my dark brown eyes, almost too big for my face, are the same as hers. As Jerry's illness progressed into dementia, he often conflated Stephanie and me, as if seeking to resurrect her. One time when I met him and my mother at Carnegie Hall, he grabbed her arm as I stepped into view. It's Stephanie, he gasped. A few years later, when he was in a nursing home, we visited him on Christmas Day, my birthday. My mother asked him, do you remember who has a Christmas birthday? Jerry looked right at me. Of course, he said. Stephanie. Jerry died of Parkinson's disease in November 2009. His daughter's murder still unsolved. I sat by his deathbed with my mother for 5 days, where I thought I sensed Stephanie's presence on the other side of the worldly veil, waiting for her dad to join her. She'd had a hold on me all that time. Why she haunted me wasn't clear. Was I seeking some ideal sisterhood, uncomplicated by the stains of abuse that mired my relationships with my own sisters in cycles of criticism and defensiveness? Did I think I could reach across death to procure the perfect sister? Did I think she was some kind of parallel me who'd fallen prey to some dark force I'd always known was out there? Did I think that if I could pinpoint how it happened, I could keep myself safe? I'd started writing about Stephanie earlier in 2009, just months before my stepdad's death. But I wrote myself into an impasse. It all felt too heavy. I put it away and thought that meant I was over Stephanie. Of course I wasn't. I did not know that her case would be reopened in Greece the very same fall that Jerry died. I turned away from Stephanie for 6 years, but still she called to me. Now in 2015, I returned to her. I contact Sandra Dorley, the district attorney of Monroe County, hoping she can help. When will you be in Rochester, she writes. So I go to try to unravel Stephanie's story, though I know it will end the same way, with her annihilation. Above all, it's some some sort of reclamation and deliverance I think I crave, and maybe the truth will provide it for Stephanie, my strange vanished double, my ghostly twin.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. And I love that last line. That's really the whole, that's the whole thing in some ways, that idea of my strange vanished double, my ghostly twin. You're very scrupulous in the book about making this Stephanie story, and about doing full justice to her. Though, I mean, I think inevitably the book is on some in some background level also about the family dynamic that you described there. But I'll talk about Stephanie first, and the situation that you found yourself in when you're writing the book is it's hard to get your head around, because this is someone with whom you have this extraordinarily intimate connection. It's your sister, your double, your twin. You're told that you look like her. She is in some sense forever 27. You're getting kind of closer to that age, but of course, in another way, you never knew her. You couldn't have. So you had to go about recreating her. One of the first things that happens when you describe that effort is that someone describes Stephanie to you as the girl next door. And you have both in the moment and later in writing the book, a particular reaction to that. Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. When that was said to me, I think that my initial reaction was a kind of stiffening up, and I felt it in the moment, and then I had to reflect on it later. And what I realized is that I am very wary and suspicious of tropes, especially when assigned to women, perhaps. Maybe because I am one, and maybe because I've had tropes assigned to me. I mentioned in another interview that I feel like I've been called a manic pixie dream girl, and I'm like, no, thank you. Like, I don't want that either, But there are ways that I found myself when I was writing thinking about sort of the virgin whore dichotomy that we tend to ascribe to women. And I've spoken in other interviews as well about a book that I read by Carolyn Mernick called The Hot One, about her junior high best friend who was murdered, and how posthumously was slut shamed. I could even think about Bob Kolker's book Lost Girls, about the sex workers who were murdered, whose bodies were found in Gilgo Beach. That what his book did was humanize these women that other people probably would have just disregarded because of what they did for a living. So it almost felt like the opposite was happening with Stephanie, that she was being robbed of her personhood and her entirety in a different way by being what virginized is a word that I've sort of landed on lately, called the girl next door. That's just like, there's a distance, right? When you're like the boy that lives next to the girl next door, you're distancing yourself from that girl. And that's the whole point. She's kind of on a pedestal. She's unattainable, but that's not the case. Stephanie was attainable. She was quite intimate with her lovers and her friends, and she was a whole person. So I think that immediately was one of my goals. How can I make her as round and as full to who she truly was as possible? Like the way that I hope people would remember me if I died.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, in some sense, trying to turn her into a character in the story, but not of the familiar simplistic kind. I mean, even though I'm sure the girl next door was meant kindly when it was said, as you said, it's still something. Sure. There's something almost accidentally dehumanizing about it. So, what are armed with that determination to portray her as she really was? How did you set about it?
I relied entirely on the memories of other people, and I can't thank them enough, or enough times, or as intense, like with enough magnitude as I would like to be able to. But her childhood friends' memories, her high school and college friends' memories, her friends from adulthood, shared so generously with me who she really was, and encouraged me also to tell the story of who she really was. I had multiple people that she loved, who loved her, who told me things that, like, were maybe not like things the girl next door would do, and I was so happy when they would tell me those things, because it made her real. So
Yeah.
I sort of began to view myself as a conduit for their stories. I would get them on the phone and they would just talk for hours, and I would barely say a word, really. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they would talk so much I could sometimes not even get off the phone with them. And in some cases, they thanked me. I had one person who thanked me for taking her back to a time before the terrible thing happened to Stephanie.
Mm.
And in other cases, they said it was kind of re-traumatizing for them, but that they were willing to do it anyway. They said, this has been really difficult for me,
Right.
but that is how I went about doing it. Like, just asking people to share their experiences with me, and then sort of lining up everybody's versions of her and seeing where there were commonalities, and just kind of trying to round her out that way.
Yeah, and where there were contradictions too, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
Because as with any human being, I mean, if you interview everyone that they knew, sometimes you're going to get conflicting information. You refer to her at one point later on in the book as she's gone from being your muse to, in some sense, your creation.
Yeah.
And that's a, you did a beautiful job of it. I can imagine it's sort of an awesome responsibility as well, because as a writer yourself, did you ever feel like there was a moment when you thought, like, well, maybe I'm obeying the dictates of story here, or of character, but maybe this is not who Stephanie was?
Yeah, I think that's why I wrote that part. I think that I'm actually acknowledging that I am very aware. I'm sort of metacognitive of the fact that I might be projecting something onto her, and I know that it's, as much as I tried not to do that, I'm aware of the fact that it's possible. So when I say she's my creation, it's the subtitle of the book is a search for a sister, and she wasn't my sister. She was my stepsister.
Right.
So I'm obviously trying to create some sort of person, that I'm sure that it's the version of her that I want her to be, and I'm very aware of that. So there was this sort of friction in between trying to be very, very accurate and loyal to who she actually was, and sort of checking myself and making sure that I wasn't running away with any other tropes that might come up for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've done, I'm curious, you've done a lot of different types of writing in your career. You have a couple of different graduate degrees. You're very familiar with, writing critically, writing artistically. But I think the true crime genre was a new one for you, unless I'm wrong. And one of the things I'm curious about is, like, what did you find the hardest part of it?
It's also the first book I've written, so everything. I mean, my MFA is in poetry, so that's like the shortest thing you can write. And then I sort of started writing some personal essays, which are about 1,500 words. But something that was very challenging was to keep it compelling throughout. So I would, I tell my eighth graders, like, no, I am now living proof that revision is like 90% of writing, and sorry, I have terrible news, kids, but it's true. The first draft was done in 2017, and it was just revision from then on, just trying to figure out, how do I make this compelling? How do I sort of portion out the information in a way that makes people want to keep reading it, but also is reflective of the journeys that the people were actually experiencing. And I think that's what I had to realize, was like, the closer I could replicate the timeline and the experiences of the people who were involved, the more compelling it could be. Also very challenging for me was you said that I did a good job of keeping the focus on Stephanie, and thank you, because that was one of the challenges for me, especially when I got to the section about the police department in Greece, New York. I credit my agent, Dan Conaway, and my editor, Daniel Lodell, with helping me refine and reshape that, because what I eventually realized, I got lost in it. I got so obsessed with the corruption of the police department because I went down a rabbit hole. I started researching, going back to the 1960s on newspapers.com, trying to figure out how this all started and how it could end up in such a horrific, like, just dissolution of an entire police department, which is what happened. But which strangely is what led to the reopening of Stephanie's case.
Yeah.
And I kind of lost sight of my anchor. Sorry, my dog is freaking. Hold on. Lulu, that's enough. Lulu. Sorry, the dangers of Zoom. Okay, she might be done. Okay.
I know if we're really unlucky, I too have a big dog right outside this room, and maybe the two of them will get each other going. And
oh yeah, that'd be fun, like a chorus.
I guess
just that I had to realize that if I could tell the story of the original investigator, Dave Connor's experiences parallel to the corruption timeline, then Stephanie would automatically be woven in, and the ways that the corruption was impacting the case would be clearer, so that actually was the trickiest part for me to write.
Yeah, and I guess I'm probably projecting here myself, but I wondered how you felt about the experience of trying to create a book by just the actual experience of interviewing strangers, sometimes in situations where they were really happy to see you, and other times when they weren't. I think I would find that really daunting. One of the nice things about being a fiction writer is that you're all by yourself making up whatever you want, and you don't have to have encounters like that if you don't want to. But did you, I mean, judging by the reception that you got in the book, it seems like you have something of a gift for it. But did you ever find that particularly challenging?
It was actually one of my favorite parts of the process, and I couldn't have foreseen it. I was really fortunate that Sandra Dorley, the DA of Monroe County, gave me a CD with 700 police files on it, and immediately, the first time I met her, and said to me, "You have to tell this story." So I felt very galvanized from the beginning, and motivated, and Stan Chiswick said the same. The police, the detective who took over when it was reopened. So I had sort of their inspiration and their motivation sort of right from the beginning, propelling me forward. And I think just in how open those two people were and how encouraging those two people were, I was sort of, I don't know, like emboldened, but I really did find that most people want to talk. I found, like I said before, the beauty of it was just that I really didn't have to say much. If someone was willing to speak to me, if I just asked one question, they would talk for 5 minutes, and I feel like I actually made friends. I am friends with people that I interviewed for this book now, and they're like lovely, beautiful friendships. I'm friends with some of Stephanie's friends now, who are reading the book and seeing themselves in the book now, which is sort of beautiful. So actually, that aspect of it was very maybe because I'm quite an extroverted person, but I really did I felt like I almost maybe felt like I was a character in the experience too, or that also I went to a lot of the places that she went to. So I kind of was trying to see the world through her eyes a little bit. I went to Martha's Vineyard. I went and looked at her apartment in Greece and just sort of imagined what she would feel like. So those aspects, the investigative stuff, was really fascinating and engaging to me, and I want to do more of it.
Oh, well, it like I say, it shows. So that is great. The reading the book, it also, it occurs to me in a sad way that just the very fact that there are so many kind of twists in the story, and so many, if only really briefly, like plausible suspects, that itself makes you realize how much we have normalized culturally the idea of violence against women. And I know that when you get toward the end of the book, you reach out and acknowledge that as well. You certainly feel free to read that section if you
Yeah, I
want.
would love to read that section,
Sure.
actually. Somebody who was interviewing me said, "You've done a really good job of proposing multiple villains." And I said, there are multiple villains in this book. So
Yeah.
the person who killed her is not the only person who victimized her.
Right.
Right. And then there's me. So I think the part you're talking about is here. I will read. It's kind of statisticky, but I will read this section. In such a story, one might expect some twist. That would be the trope in the story about the girl next door. But there are no big surprises here, only lessons to learn. One is that the biggest danger to women, including trans women, and in fact to all femme-presenting people, without a doubt, is men. Of all female homicide victims worldwide, over 50% are killed by intimate partners, and 98% of those intimate partners are men. In 2017, the FBI found that of all homicides where the victim was a woman and the perpetrator a man, and both parties could be identified, 98% of the killers were men the women knew in some capacity. Overall, men kill over 85% of all homicide victims, men or women. In 2015, in the United States, there were 23 recorded homicides of trans women, all but one were killed by a man. The biggest threat to women is men, especially ones they know. The gender theorist Judith Butler said in a 2015 interview, killing is an act of power, a way of reasserting domination, even a way of saying, I am the one who decides who lives and dies. So killing establishes the killer as sovereign in the moment that he kills, and that is the most toxic form that masculinity can take. That's the end of her quote. And then I follow by saying, there's an undercurrent of violence constantly adjacent to women's lives, which I feel myself as a woman in the world.
Yeah. Well, that's, as I started out saying, that's one of the things that makes this book so extraordinary is that by telling this story whose details are so specific and unusual that it seems unprecedented, through the details of it, you very much get to this larger narrative and the larger story about male violence against women, and also, not coincidentally, the story of how that violence is usually lazily, misogynistically handled by mass culture, where
Yeah.
the kind of care that you take with it isn't generally taken. I see there's one question here, but I just wanted to mention as we get toward the bottom of the hour, as they say on the radio, that if you have anything at all you want to ask Rachel, just type it in there, and we promise we will get to it soon. So I did want to ask too, as I said, a little bit about you as a character in the story, not just its author, because I'm fascinated by the some of the things that you hint at, even in the section that you read at the beginning about your life. I mean, I know you were already you weren't a little kid when this happened, but you were still a young person, and the idea that you were not only entering into this blended family that had this horrible, traumatic, and at that point unresolved issue, but that Jerry, as his condition worsened, would actually mistake you for her. I can you just say a little bit about what that felt like at the time?
I was grateful for it in a strange way. It made me hope that he I don't want to sound like I'm saying this definitely was happening, but perhaps he was getting some solace in the moments where he really did confuse us. I don't know. It also was heartbreaking because he was clearly looking for her forever. Like at Carnegie Hall, from far away, he thought that I was her, and her body had already been found, and he said, "It's Stephanie." So it was it would be heartbreaking sometimes, but then like the Christmas Day thing, and it wasn't just that he mixed us up, he sort of made us one thing. My birthday is Christmas, and he said, "It's Stephanie who has a Christmas birthday." So we were conflated, we were like one thing. So it didn't disturb me, although it was a kind of an otherworldly experience. And I wouldn't say that it necessarily sort of propelled my writing I wasn't writing the book for Jerry, but it definitely piqued my curiosity about her and who she was, because it wasn't just what I looked like. It was the way that I behaved, it was my mannerisms. It was the way that I acted. So there was something there for even him. And then that was echoed and again and again and again throughout my research, that I looked like her, reminded people of her, etc. Even one of her boyfriends from Martha's Vineyard sat down with me at brunch and was like, "Are you sure you're not related?" Like people
Wow.
kept saying that to me. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah. And also answers, I think, something else I wondered about, which is, in terms of the impetus to write the book, sometimes it seems to me, from the outside as a reader, like in these moments, unconsciously, it's like Jerry is asking you for something. If that, if you ever felt, again, either as an adult or as a younger person, that kind of burden.
I felt that he was looking for her, and that if I could provide, even just by going to visit him at the nursing home and sort of sitting with him and holding his hands,
Sure.
if I could provide that even a little bit, I was happy to do so. But I wouldn't say necessarily that is the only thing that was as I said, like I was 14 when she went missing, and years before my mom married him. In fact, one of the things I talk about in the book is my mom gave me all his files, and there's like a stack of condolence cards from when she first went missing in 1991, and one of them is from my mother.
Wow.
So like my mother actually wrote a card to him and said, "As the mother of 3 daughters, I can't imagine what you're going through," because he was our teacher, So I had been in orchestras conducted by him, so he was very music was so important to me. So he's responsible for that, and he was owed a lot. He really was. He was. I don't know that my book is the answer to all the things that he's owed, but he is owed a lot of gratitude.
Well, that would be a great place to end right there. But instead, I'm just going to ask you like the awful question that everybody asks at the end of these, partly because I'm curious, which is, what are you working on now?
I'm on sabbatical from my teaching job for 6 months, kind of so I can be free for book events and things, but also because I do want to write more true crime. It's challenging to do so when there's not the personal connection. I don't have the same impetus because it's not connected to me, but I am pretty heavily involved in researching. I talk about it in the book. Actually, it's one of the other cases that was opened by Todd Baxter when Stephanie's case was reopened, and it's the case of the Holiday Inn fire that happened in Greece in 1978, where 10 people died, and it was later declared an arson, which means that and it's unsolved, so it's 10 unsolved homicides. As I was writing this book, I got in touch with a lot of people who are sort of like Greece local politics experts and things like that. And people started actually asking me, would you consider writing a book about the Holiday Inn fire? So it's kind of, again, this thing that I'm being called upon to do. So I hope I can do it, because those people deserve, closure is not the word, but they deserve something, recognition and acknowledgement of their pain.
Yep. Yep, as you talked about with Stephanie, like people are sometimes victimized a second time by being made into a type of two-dimensional figure in their victimhood. So yeah, if you just restore them to their humanity, that's an important job too. All right, so if you don't mind, Dura, we have a few questions that have rolled in here. The first one I think has just been answered really, which is, do you have plans of doing more true crime books? That's a yes.
Yes,
Which
absolutely.
yeah, glad for it. How do you? This might be difficult to answer, partly for like almost spoiler related reasons, but how do you reconcile your relationship with Jerry Kopczynski with what you learned about his relationship with Stephanie?
It's not too much of a spoiler, because I mean, one of the things that I discovered, and I disclosed pretty early on, is that my stepfather wasn't as gentle as I thought he was. The way that, I mean, what was the word they used? Well, what was the word they used?
How do you
How do I
reconcile
Okay.
your relationship with Jerry?
I think that Jerry loved Stephanie fiercely and loyally, and I think that his life was a series of trials. He was conscripted by Nazis. He lived in a displaced persons camp in Bavaria. He was separated from his mother at the displaced persons camp. His first wife died of multiple sclerosis. Like, his life was very trying. And I think when he became a de facto single dad, because his wife was living in an institution permanently, that he was in over his head. And I called it sort of like that was the thing that did him in after all those other things. So I think that he went through a lot of things that required indomitability. Is that the word? Fierceness, grit, if you will. That's a popular word. And I think that's what he knew how to do, and he applied it to parenting, and it didn't serve Stephanie. But I also think that people have asked me, like, how do I compare my dad to him? And my dad was sadistic and her dad was loving. So there's a vast difference also in their motivations for their abusive behavior. And I think that matters. I think that if Stephanie had lived past the age of 27 and maybe sought therapy, as she was in therapy and she was making strides, that she would have come to terms with her childhood.
Yeah. All right, thank you. And the last one is a two-parter, actually. First, it says, your book is a great read. Was there any one experience that particularly stuck with you?
One experience. I mean, a lot of it was pretty amazing. The first thing that comes to mind is going to Martha's Vineyard in the dead of winter, see, because Jerry would say in a few articles that Stephanie left Martha's Vineyard because she was depressed and because she had seasonal depression. So I figured I will go there at the worst time ever. Like, let me go there when it's the worst time ever. So I went in like mid-January, and it was pretty bad. And so that's the only time I've ever been to Martha's Vineyard. So when people talk to me about how great it is, I'm like, that is not my experience. I think literally there was like 2 restaurants open, and I saw a very bleak place. And that was although I did go to the Jaws Bridge and go see Captain Quint's shack, and the Jaws stuff was cool because that's my favorite movie. But Martha's Vineyard in January, I was going to say do not recommend, but recommend if you're looking for something kind of interestingly bleak and desolate. So that was interesting for sure.
Yeah. And part 2 of that question is, can we look forward to a podcast?
I am going to be a guest on several podcasts in the next few weeks. So if you follow me on Twitter, I'll be posting links to things like that. I have considered sometimes, starting a podcast. I think that it would depend on what story I was trying to tell. if I found a story that I thought lent itself better to that genre, I would absolutely think about it. I think it could be really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so then that's a conditional yes. Good.
The conditional yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for this. This was great, and I can't
Thank you.
recommend the
Good
book
to see you.
more strongly to everybody out there who I can't see. And here we're being rejoined. Hi.
Hi, Juliana.
Hello, everyone, and thank you both for this conversation, and thank you everyone who joined tonight, and thank you, Rachel, for sharing your experience with this book. And I'm looking forward to reading it, and I hope everyone else does too. And don't forget that you can purchase this book from Books and Books on our website or in stores, and I hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks.
Thank you.